So we have a range of appendices research data here that we want to also append to because I'm trying to be ironic. There's a couple of approaches to doing this, and the one you're probably most familiar with is using the append rows method in Spreadsheet app, and we'll test that out in a moment. But in this tutorial, we're going to take things a little bit further and dive into the Sheets API advanced service and try out the append method from the advanced service. There's a couple of benefits to that, and that's what we'll be discussing throughout this tutorial. Now, if you want to play along, and I encourage that you do, grab a copy of the starter sheet in the link in the description below. Once you've made a copy, open up the sheet, head over to extensions and app script, and you should have a script that looks like this. Okay, so I'm just going to move this sheet over to the right hand side here so that you can see, and make sure that things are zoomed in a little. There we go, to make things more viewable. All right, so on my right hand side here, I have the sheet, and this is the associated Google app script. Now, traditionally, we would use something like, let's create a dummy function. So function append rows simple. Okay. And in that append rows, we could do something like const ss equals spreadsheet app get active spreadsheet, and then const sheet equals ss.getSheet sheet by name, and then go append row. Now we can't apply append row to a particular range, but we can apply append row to a sheet. And here we're just going to set our data that we need to append. So what does it say here? We need to enter in an array. So an array of values inserted in here. So instead of just like in Google Apps Script where we have each row is an array, and then inside each row there is a subarray, so a two-dimensional array of data, we only need to provide a single row of data here. So let's just do that. We've got our sheet will be sheet ID sheet 1, so we need to insert that up here before we forget. So we'll say sheet 1, and then we'll just add in some dummy stuff. Actually, let's just grab this here. Control C, overwrite this one, Control V, save, and let's just head up to our append rows and simple and hit run. And we'll go continue. Okay, so nothing happened on this sheet because down the bottom here, we just happen to have a bit of cheeky information down the bottom here that we wanted to prove a point that what we're appending is always going to be down the bottom of the sheet. So if we just delete that, we're back to normal. Okay, so I've just highlighted one of the benefits already of using the advanced service append. With advanced service, we can select a range, and it doesn't have to be the entire sheet. It could be just a selected range. Let's say from this A4 all the way down to A46, for example. And that's the range we just want to append to. Nothing more, nothing less. That's it. Okay, so let's just dive in to what we need to do to get this cracking. So because you've made a copy of this sheet, you should already have the Sheets Advanced Service all set up and ready to go and set to identifier called Sheets. Now, if you don't, you just go to Service, search for Google Sheets, which won't be here because it's already in action. Make sure it's on version 4, Sheets, hit Add. All right. So what's the first thing we need to do? Well, we need our Sheets ID. Now, of course, you can always use this approach and combine the two approaches with Spreadsheet App and the Sheets API Advanced Service. But let's just stick to the Sheets API Advanced Service methods, and that means we'll have to manually draw in the ID, which is going to be this URL section, or this section of the URL, I should say, up the top here. I'm going to copy it, and you're going to do the same with yours, which will be different, and we'll paste that bad boy in there. Okay, so let's start off with just creating a basic append. So we'll keep the documentation here. The documentation is handy, but it doesn't quite have the formatting that we need in Google Apps Script to complete it. So there's some compulsory bits of data that we do need, and the first one is going to be the spreadsheet ID. We'll also need the data that we're going to put in. Now, the cool thing, another cool point of using the Sheets API Advanced service is that we can append multiple rows of data in there instead of just a single row like we could here. So I have a larger tutorial here on creating a Google Sheets row archiver with Sheets API. And what I'm actually doing is finding when things have expired based on some search queries and just grabbing those rows, combining them together into a two-dimensional array, and then appending that into an archive sheet. So just like we've done here. So we're just doing the append side, of course, but it gives you an idea that you can grab bits of data from different locations, mush them together, and then append those that 2D array. All right, so we've got that there. And then what we can do next is we need to select a range to append. And this is kind of confusing in the documentation here. It just says path parameters and range. And you might think, oh, that's the range of data that we have here. Well, it's not. It's the A1 notation of a range to search for a logical table of data. And what does that mean in short? Well, we could shorten that to say const range to append. It's going to be equal to, and we want to put in our sheet 1, and let's just go back to our spreadsheet now, and we say we want to append within the range of, say, A4 all the way down to A46. So we could say A4 to A46. So now it's going to basically iterate over this range until it finds the first empty row and append to it. Now, if we've got a bunch of yucky data here that's missing a bunch of empty cells in this range, for example, then we might want to choose column B here as our range to append to. So it would find the last value in this one because we know size is always going to be ever present. So that's another handy aspect as well. There it is. We'll turn that back safely now. Okay, so we've got this data. We've selected our range. Going from A4 to A46, so it's not going to interfere with this summary data that some silly person has put down the bottom here. The last mandatory piece of data we need to put in is the column must specify the sheet ID range and the value input option. It's one of these query parameters that we need to add in here. It's this value input option. Okay, so let's put that in a payload so we can add extra query parameters later if we wish. So let's create a constant variable called payload. That's going to be equal to an object. And inside that object is this. And let's see what this opens. So let's open this up on here. And we've got some options here. So default input value, this value must not be used. So it's weird, but we can't. I guess that just means it's anything that you leave blank, it's going to do the same thing and create an error. Our next option is raw. The values the user has entered will not be passed and will be stored as is. And then user entered. The values will be passed as if the user typed them into the user interface, so into the cells. Numbers will stay as numbers, but strings may be converted to numbers, dates, etc., following the same rules. So perhaps let's just go with user entered. So we'll put that in there and we'll just add in a little comment. And it's saying this is mandatory and these are our two options really here. Okay, we build our payload. Now we are into making a call to the Sheets API. So first, let's make a place to store any return results. So we might get some information back here. So we'll say let result, and then we'll do a try catch. So we'll say try, and then we'll do a little catch here. And that's going to catch an error and do something with the error. All right, so what have we got? Okay, so the first thing that we have is we want to put in our result. So try result is equal to, and then we're going to call our sheets dot spreadsheet dot values dot, and then we're going to use this append here. Okay, we've got our append. Let's open this up to multi-line so it's easy for us to add. And the first thing it's asking us to do is add in the value range. So what's the value range? Where is this in the instructions here? So that is actually going to be this request body here where it says value range. And the value range is going to be very similar in how we write it in Google Apps Scripts. But we're going to skip these major dimensions and the range, we're just going to add the values here. So we've already got our two-dimensional array up the top here full of our data. So for our value range, all we're going to do is add in an object with the property values, just like this one here. And then we're going to put in our 2D array. So that's going to contain the values of our data. All right, put a comma in and we'll make a note. And I suggest you do the same for yourself so you have some reference material. And let's move on to the next line. So the next thing we need to add is our spreadsheet ID. So that will be our SSID up here. So we'll copy that and whack that in here, add a comma, and we're done. Okay, so the next thing we need is our range string. And this is going to be our range to append. But let's just add some notes in for the SSID. And we'll add in our range to append. Hit a comma. And we'll put in these notes that we had over here. So you could do the same, as long as I can find it. Here. Just maybe add in this sentence just for clarity, because this is probably the most confusing part of using this append method. Should put that in a comment. There we go. Rock and roll. And finally, we want to add in our payload, which is going to be our query parameters here. All right, last little bit before we can do our first attempt is we need to throw an error, or you can handle your error however you like, or you can even, it could even be good practice for you just to let the error occur. It'll display an error anyway. We're just sort of crafting an error a little bit more easily this way. So we can say throw new error. And we'll use backticks here for template literals and say failed. Append rows to sheet in range, comma, and let's add in this range that we were trying to append to, range to append. Oh, did some weird stuff there. And comma with error, and that will be our error log here. Okay, last thing we need to do is probably create a bit more space. So we can get up here a bit and you can read things a bit more clearly. And we'll say console.log, and we'll log these results that are going to be returned. Okay, save. All right, if we haven't done anything silly, we should be good to go. So let's change our function that we're going to run to append rows and hit run. Oh, user entered is not defined, of course. Let's change that to a string, hit save, and hit run. Range to A, let's have a look. Range to append. Too busy talking, then paying attention. Try that again. Okay, so we're going to fail to append rows in sheet range. This with error. Why? So we've got a sheet here called sheet, but not sheet one. What we're after is sheet one. So my own usual advice is just to copy the entire sheet tab and then paste it in, so you don't do silly things like this. But at least we know our throw new error worked effectively, right? Okay, so now instead of appending to the bottom here, it only appended to this area of empty space, which is great. It's exactly what we wanted. Cool. Let's delete that and make some modifications. Let's now play around with some of these additional query parameters. So we've already got the value input option here. So we'll say, okay. Let's try this first one. So the insert data option. So we'll grab that. And this is kind of an interesting option here. So it's actually going to provide two options. So we'll add them in as comments. We'll put a comma in here, and let's just choose let's choose overwrite first, I think. Hit copy. Okay. We need to add a comma up here for everything to be fine. And let's have a look at insert data options. Get rid of some of these. Okay. So we've got two options here. First one is overwrite. The new data overwrites existing data in the areas it is written in. Note, adding data to the end of the sheet will still insert new rows or columns. Yeah, fair enough. If we've run out of columns or rows, we're going to update it. Insert rows. So if we use the insert row section, it's actually going to add extra rows. So let's do the first one here with this overwrite attempt, and we'll hit run. Okay, so 21 to 24, nothing much happened here. This is down to 51. If we were to run it again, let's maybe zoom out a bit so you can see. We'll run the append again. So no additional rows have been added. Okay, so delete that. What happens if we change this to insert rows? Okay, so have a look here. We're at 51 here. And this is at 20 here. Let's give it a spin. Okay, so now instead of the average size starting at 51, we're down to 55, and we've started at 20 here. Even this formatting here of this last border has been inserted above that head. So we know that it will say insert above the target cell. So let's delete that. All right, let's head back to override on that one, and we'll keep that one as it is. Now overwrite should be default there, and let's see what else we can add here. So something we haven't noticed too is that we've been getting some results. So if we have a look at the results here, we've got a table range that is returned, and the result here with our console log. We get the spreadsheet ID, we get the updated columns. So that's sort of handy. So how many columns are updated? Well, there's 4. We know that already because we've got this here. We've also got the updated cells, I should say. So that's from here, so 1 over to here. So that's a total count of 1, 2, 3, 4 by 1, 2, 3, 4, which is 16. Also not that handy. Let's just add it in again so you can see what's going on, see what the change is in here. So let's do that. Okay, so now this should say A4 to A20, so that's where it started from, the starting point of the table range. And then if you look at the updated range here, we've got A21 to D24. So this is the range that was updated here. That's a handy piece of information, particularly if you want to do some formatting on the range that you just appended, then you could call this, grab this range and do some appending. Cool. So we can add to this by returning also the data to that range. So let's go back to that method again. We can get rid of this one. We'll grab this. Control C, Control V. And we've got a Boolean here. So it determines if the updated response should include the value. So you just write true here or just leave it out. So we'll say true and grab a comma here and hit save. And now let's hit run. And you can see now that we have our values here within this object. Now, if we really wanted to see that, we could do some, let's copy this. And we could say JSON stringify, and in here we'll put in a null, comma, quotation mark space, close the brackets and hit save, and we should be able to see the 2D array now in the second log if I can spell stringify instead of stingify. Let's give that a spin. There it is. Okay, so there's our 2D array that we've returned in here. Now, remember, every time we do a call with extra data, it makes the call costly and can take up more time of our processing, right? So be circumspect about whether or not you want that added in. So we're just going to go false here instead of deleting it out. So we have a reference, so false. Okay, so having said that, even though some of these options aren't entirely effective, I hope you can see the benefit of using the append data in the Sheets API Advanced service. It certainly has a benefit of adding in multiple rows and also allows you to append in any section of your sheet and then use a guiding column of your choice to determine where the end of those rows are. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please hit that like button, and if you want to see more tutorials like this, subscribe. Until next time.